Alright, guys, so today we're going to talk about comic books, actually, because I have picked up ISOM number 1, the debut book from Rippaverse Comics. Right there it is. Which I did end up getting cover C because covers A and B were already sold out by the time I got around to ordering. But I wanted to discuss this today because this is the first book from Rippaverse Comics, which was started by Eric July, aka Young Rippa 59 here on YouTube, which is a channel that I've been subbed to for several years now. I'm a big fan of his content. I'll put a link in the description to his channel for anyone who hasn't checked it out if they want to. And, I've been following this for a while before it came out, with him posting stuff talking about, the big two and other comic book companies and their many shortcomings as of late as far as the products they've been putting out, and how he wanted to, step into that realm and release something of his own and basically do it right where they did it wrong. So I wanted to get this and evaluate for myself exactly how good of a job he would do in achieving that goal. Before I dive into this, I do want to just give a little background on myself. I'm not a huge, lifelong comics guy. When I was a kid, the only comics I read were the Bionicle comics that I got free every month in the mail, because I was subscribed to that Lego Club or whatever it was back in the day, which unfortunately I don't have those anymore. But I didn't really start getting more into comics until later on in my adulthood, a little bit earlier, maybe early teens. I started dabbling in manga a little bit. And then I didn't really dive into American comics more in depth until a few years ago when Boom Studios started their Power Ranger run. And that was mainly just because I'm a huge Power Ranger fan. So I am definitely a more recent comic book fan. Maybe 6 to 8 years now that I've been into it. So just to be clear up front, I am by no means a comic book expert, nor do I pretend to be one on the internet. But I did want to give my thoughts on this, which overall I was very impressed. I enjoyed the book. He has made it clear that he wanted this to be, a launching point for a much greater universe, and I thought it did a good job setting up a lot of things and kind of pulling people into this world. Now, I am going to go through the story briefly here, so, spoiler warning for anyone who does want to read this and doesn't want to have any spoilers. We are going to, get into the plot and things here, so fair warning. But anyway, the book starts out with Avery Silman, who is our main character, who is ISOM, or at least used to be ISOM. Since when the book starts, we see him, he's basically already retired from his hero life. And now he runs his own ranch. And he's basically just, doing his own thing and kind of living a secluded life out in the country. So Avery ends up getting a call from his sister, Altona, and his sister is concerned about this other girl named Jasmine, who is the daughter of one of their family friends. And Jasmine was an intern at the company that Altona works for, which is named Projexus, and she's one of the higher ups in the company, I believe. So Jasmine was an intern, and they were going to offer her a job, but now Jasmine has disappeared. And Altona is calling up Avery for him to investigate and kind of figure out what's going on there, which is the beginning of the main story of this book. So Avery ends up going into the city, and he meets with a guy that Jasmine has gotten involved with named Darren, which Darren is the main antagonist for this. Which he's he owns a nightclub named Club Merc, and he's very clearly, got some criminal activity going on the side. but he's sort of like a, big wig, wheeling and dealing kind of gangster mob boss kind of guy. So Avery meets up with Darren, and we learn that Avery and Darren used to be friends in school, and now, of course, they've taken very different paths. So Avery's trying to figure out what's going on with Jasmine, and Darren doesn't want to tell him anything, so he ends up kind of just shrugging him off and trying to kick him out of the building. And Avery gets into a fight with Darren's security guys, which he easily beats the crap out of, until he runs into the big guy, which is named Santuan, I believe. And Santuan is an accept, which is what this world is using to call people that have powers. So Santuan has super strength, and he's built like a brick shithouse. So he gets into a fight with Avery and ends up whooping his ass. So Avery gets thrown out of the building. And then as he's getting thrown out, like literally flying through the air, thrown out of the building, he ends up colliding in midair with Yaira. Which Yaira is the other main character who was heavily featured in a lot of the pre-release materials for this book. So he runs into Yaira, and we end up having a Toku misunderstanding fight in the middle of this, which I thought was funny because this is just something that you see happen a lot in like Kamen Rider or Super Sentai crossovers, where two characters run into each other and kind of, mistake each other's identities, mistake them for villains or whatever, and they get into a needless fight. That's kind of what happened here. So they end up getting into a fight, and Avery gets whooped again. And Yaira was in the middle of her battle with the Alpha Corps at the time. Which the Alpha Corps is basically like a special unit of the police who are meant to deal with accept criminals. So the Alpha Corps get involved, and Avery ends up getting dropped on top of a taxi. So they end up taking him to the hospital. So then we jump ahead a little bit, and we see Avery, or we see the doctors rather, talking about Avery, and they mention that all their tests came back that he's actually not an accept. Which Avery does have powers. We don't know the full breadth of his powers. We know that he does have super strength and obviously some resistance because some things happened to him that would kill a normal person and they didn't kill him. So he does have powers, but apparently he's not an accept. So we don't really know the origin of Avery's powers or anything about them. We do learn that Avery has some sort of a bracelet that was on his ankle. He ends up taking it off and putting it on his wrist. So one of the nurses mentioned that they tried to cut through this bracelet and they couldn't. So this bracelet is clearly significant. We don't know anything about it, whether it's the source of his powers or something else entirely, but they put some emphasis on this bracelet, so obviously it's important. But anyway, Avery ends up escaping from the hospital, and he calls up his sister to go pick him up, and he regroups because he wants to go back to Club Merc and try to get some info on Jasmine still. So he ends up going back, and he actually runs into Jasmine, sort of happenstance. And he's trying to see if she's okay and get some info out of her, and she doesn't really want to deal with him. Jasmine just kind of brushes him off and leaves. So he ends up getting into a fight with all the security guys again, and he beats all them up, and then he has his rematch with Santuan, and this time he wins. But at the end, the cops end up showing up, and he has to run away before he can actually get back to Darren and get any info about what's going on. So he retreats again. He goes back to his sister's house. And this is where we find a little bit more about his family. We meet his niece, who is named Vassie, who is, I believe, 8-year-old little girl. We find out that Altona's husband, Terald, is dead. So she's raising Vassie on her own now. Apparently Vassie doesn't know that Avery has powers and that he used to be a superhero, though she's kind of figuring it out on her own, and Avery sort of has to get her off the trail and kind of pass it off as, oh, he's strong just because he lifts weights a lot. So Vassie doesn't really know what's going on, but they're trying to keep her from finding out. So anyway, the next day, Avery ends up going back to meet an old acquaintance of his, which this guy's name actually isn't mentioned in the book, though, I've looked at some of the supplemental materials and stuff that have been put out, and we find out that this guy is named Cedric Guacho, and he's a tailor. He owns a clothing store named Taylorsville, and his store is actually just a front, because now he owns like an entire secret underground base where he makes suits for superheroes. Which, this is the guy that made Avery's ISOM suit back in the day when he was doing his full-time heroing. So we learned that Avery actually returned his suit to Cedric when he retired from that life and went to just, live on his ranch. So now that he's getting roped back into all this nonsense, he goes to Cedric and wants to get his suit back. And he learns that Cedric's, superhero side of his business has expanded to quite an extreme degree. So he talks to Cedric and he gets his suit back, and that's sort of the big last scene at the end of Avery trying on his suit and saying that still fits. And that's where it ends. So we didn't get any resolution to the actual plot in this book. Obviously, that's going to be followed up in ISOM number 2, whenever that gets ready to come out. There was one more teaser at the end where we see a band performing on stage, and we see these two guys, one of which looks like a Viking dude, and then the other dude's like a black guy with dreadlocks. Which, again, we didn't find out their names, but through the supplemental materials, we learned that they're named Valadon and Takari, respectively. Which, both these guys have powers too. We don't know if they're accepts or exactly what they are. But they're talking about sensing some greater evil and maybe having to amass, some forces to fight against it. So it was a vague teaser at the end about, some grander threats that's on a much greater scale than, local thug guy Darren that Avery is dealing with. Which the band is named Norfrika, by the way, which I assume is a combination of Norse and Africa, since Valadon seems to be, very Nordic themed, while Takari seems to be African themed. So we did get that at the end, setting up our grander thing, which I'm assuming is going to be Dokumon, which was another character that they mentioned in the pre-release teaser stuff, which actually did not make an appearance in this book at all. We didn't see Dokumon, we didn't hear anything from him. I assume he's involved in that greater threat that Norfrika was referencing. But I was hoping we would get a little bit more on him. And a little more on Yaira, too, because we saw her fight with the Alpha Corps early on, and then her encounter with Avery, and then we never saw her again. And for someone who was as heavily featured in the pre-release stuff as she was, I was expecting a lot more out of her, and maybe some more info on like what her motivations are, what she's doing, her powers, really anything. And we didn't really get much of that. A few other quick things I wanted to mention. There were several threads that were started in this that, again, were just left hanging. That'll be followed up on in future books. In Club Merc, we saw these two people who were talking about sort of their own kind of criminal empire, which it was a guy, which, again, their names weren't mentioned, but through supplemental stuff, we found out that the guy is named Michael Copper. And then we see a woman with him named Lillian Ronashi. So both of them are accepts. They did have powers, and they're clearly up to no good as well. But we didn't really find out anything more about them. There was also a cliffhanger with Sam, who is the sort of second in command back at the ranch, kind of in charge of everything, where we saw him sort of training one of the workers there and kind of helping him, move up in his career at the ranch. And then there was a scene towards the end of that where Sam notices that the barn door is open and he pulls out his gun and goes to investigate, and we never got any more on that either. So we have no idea what was going on inside the barn. So there was a lot of cliffhangers, a lot of questions here. I think actually this book probably left me with more questions than it ended up answering. Which on one hand is very good because they get you invested in the story and makes you want to buy the next thing. But on the other hand, it's also kind of like, I've built up all this anticipation for this first book, and I was hoping there'd be just a little bit more answers in it than there actually was. But overall, I do think the world was very interesting. I liked the stories that they set up. I liked the characters. Avery, one of the things that I really appreciated about Avery was after he lost his first fight, when he went back, he mentioned several times that, he was concerned about Jasmine, of course, but one of the main reasons that he wanted to go back was just that Darren and his guys disrespected him. And he wanted to get payback for it, which I appreciated that. I liked his, taking no shit attitude that he had. So I liked Avery as a character. I liked the world. I feel like this book did its job. The goal of this book is to get people invested enough to buy the next book. And to, be an introduction to this huge world that they're setting up. And I felt like it done a good job of doing that. I do plan on getting ISOM number 2 whenever that campaign begins. And there was a lot of things here that were teasing, a greater world. Early on, we did see a scene with some of the cops discussing, some of the vigilantes in the city that have been helping them lately. They even mentioned some woman with red hair, who we've not seen any characters with red hair at all, so that's teasing somebody we haven't seen yet. Cedric, the tailor, he mentions having materials from other planets and stuff, so, it's teasing alien races and things that are already here. There was a lot of subtle hints for things to come, which I did appreciate that. I also appreciated the few wrestling references in it, being a wrestling fan. Again, Cedric mentioned that he used to have a contract with one of the local wrestling promotions. And then even in some of the fight scenes, we had a few wrestling moves, like Santuan hit a German suplex at one point, and Avery chokeslammed a dude. So, I appreciate that as a wrestling guy. But yeah, also as far as the item itself goes, the book is of very good quality. The paper stock is very good. The arts is fantastic. I did notice a few typos. It wasn't anything major. Like, one time I saw, like, there was a extra A in a sentence, like the word A was there one more time than it should have been. And towards the end, I think they misspelled the word cavalry at one point. But, it wasn't anything major where you can't completely understand what's going on or anything. It was just minor little typos. Also, there was one ad page in the middle of the book, so, just so people are aware. But, yeah, overall, I was very satisfied with my purchase. And, like I said, I do plan on continuing to purchase Rippaverse books in the future as they come out. So, I was pleased with it, you can leave a comment, anybody who's bought it or plans to buy it, and, say what you think as well. But, yeah, I think it was a very good effort as far as, first time out of the gate for Eric and his company, and I absolutely look forward to seeing what's coming in the future. So, anyway, I guess that's all I got to say, so lots of luck to you and yours.